Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. It's the post-game podcast. The Wolves beat the Suns by 18. Ant drops 44. Julius Randle comes back, and Donte DiVincenzo hits 8 threes off the bench. An exciting comeback win for the Wolves. We'll break it all down next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Happy Monday, everybody. And it's a victory Monday. The Timberwolves had a big win against the Suns on Sunday. Big for a number of reasons. Of course, the Ant performance, the fact that they just could not afford to lose a third straight game and lose to Phoenix, who's suddenly on their heels in the play-in range in the Western Conference. Just like at this point in the year, I mean, all games count the same, and that's been the case since October, but like now it really matters. Like because of where the Wolves are now, they have to win the games that they should win. And still no Rudy Gobert, but the return of Julius Randle was big in this one. We'll dive into that. We'll talk Ant at his 44. We'll talk the non-foul flagrant foul as well, of course, later. So lots to get to in this one. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And a reminder about the daily Locked On Wolves newsletter. You can sign up at lockedondaily.com. You'll get it really is a one-stop shop for all things Wolves, all things NBA. You'll get notes from myself on the show. You'll get national notes from national writers and some other NBA stuff to your inbox daily, Monday through Friday, to your email inbox. Just sign up at lockedondaily.com. All right. Lots to get to in this one. This was it ended up being a fun game. The first half was a bit more of a slog. First quarter was fun, but a lot of issues for the Wolves. And then the second quarter was just it was tough basketball. Minnesota was down 6 at the end of the first. They were still down by a bucket at halftime. And they just weren't playing well. There was nothing to point out, like they're doing this one thing terribly other than, I guess rebounding was a major issue early in this game. And ultimately for the game as a whole, we'll talk about that a little bit. And then as soon as we got to the third quarter, the action really picked up. And I think that's really what I want to kind of dive in on here in a minute. But I want to start with the Julius Randle piece of things. And obviously Ant scored 44, and we are going to talk about that. But like Ant's had some of these big scoring games over the last month or so, and this one felt easier. He ultimately did shoot a bunch of free throws. A lot of that came late. We will talk about that. He did make a bunch of threes, but this one felt easier because it just seemed like there was a little bit more room to operate. And I credit the return of Julius Randle for that. Of course, Randle had missed 13 games. I think the Wolves went 5-8 without him. And I'll be the first to acknowledge Julius Randle has his issues. He's not a perfect synergistic fit for this team. He doesn't fit as well as Karl-Anthony Towns. He's not as good as Karl-Anthony Towns. All these things are true. But he is important to this team because without him on the floor, the way I put this in the past is there's a total of 3 to 4 guys on this team who can create their own shot, which I think sometimes can be a bit of an overused kind of tired trope about creating your own shot. But it can be a real thing, right? Like Jaden McDaniels lately with Ant out, Ant out a couple of games, but with Randle out, with Rudy out, with DiVincenzo out, like McDaniels has scored a little bit on his own. He's needed to, and he actually did it really well. But previously in his career, he had not proven he could do that. Mike Conley's not scoring on his own. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, you don't want him to try and score on his own. Like that's not, these guys can score within the flow of the offense. They can score in the open floor. They're valuable defensively, etc. But they're not score off the dribble, offense runs through you type of a guy, right? So without Julius Randle, you're left with Reid can do that sometimes. And I would argue that the fourth guy is probably Rob Dillingham, who is apparently no longer in the rotation. And we'll talk a bit about that later too. So you need Julius Randle. And while Naz can do it, we'll talk about Naz's struggles. Naz shot 3 of 15 in this game. He shot greater than 50% one time since the All-Star break. Like, he's really struggling with his shot. And so when you have the only other guy, one of them's basically out of the rotation, Dillingham, and was never consistent when he was in the rotation. Naz Reid is not shooting the ball well. You need another guy to help pull attention away from the defense. And as good as Jaden had been playing offensively, a big reason for that was because teams weren't respecting him, right? He was getting late closeouts on three-point attempts and was attacking late closeouts with the defense kind of, still shaded the other direction because they're not really afraid of Jaden McDaniels shooting a corner three or even Jaden McDaniels putting the ball on the floor. So the assignments he was drawing and the lack of attention he was garnering allowed Jaden the freedom to be a little bit more explosive. Explosive is not the right word. A little bit more active offense, a little bit more effective offensively. And he, to his credit, he took advantage of that. But with Julius Randle, if you stick your worst defender on him, he's going to score. If you put a good defender on him, he's got a good chance of scoring. You have to at least consider putting a solid defender on him and or doubling him if he puts his back to the basket. And as soon as you do that, because Julius Randle playing bully ball against many defenders is going to result in a good possession for Minnesota. It is. Even if it bogs things down, and even if he doesn't score every time, and even if a mid-range jump shot isn't the most efficient shot in basketball, Julius Randle's really good at bullying guys to the elbow and getting fouled and or making a shot. He is. And so if opposing defenses don't want that, they're going to have to commit more resources to slowing him down, which of course opens more things up for Anthony Edwards. And it's not the same traditional floor spacing that Karl-Anthony Towns provided, but it is better than not having Julius Randle on the floor. It's better than starting Jaden McDaniels at the 4 and then having Alexander Walker in the starting lineup, or it's better than, having TJ Shannon or Jalen Clark in the starting lineup. It just is. And I know those guys are fun, and I'm sure they'll have great careers, and they're going to be important down the stretch. But having Julius Randle on the floor to put up 20 on 14 shots is a valuable thing more often than not. Sometimes could Chris Finch pull the shoot sooner if Randall's not having a good night? Should he take him out in crunch time if he's not having a good night? Yes, absolutely. But there are many games where the idea of Julius Randle scares the defense enough that it opens things up for Anthony Edwards. And we saw that in this game. We'll talk a bit more, maybe tomorrow's show, since the Wolves don't play tonight. We'll dig into some of the Randle on-off numbers because early in the year they were shaky. But I think this game is the example of why his presence is so important. And that made a big difference for Anthony Edwards early. The other returning player who's now been on the floor, I think this was his third game, Donte DiVincenzo, he was awesome. DiVincenzo played 27 minutes off the bench. He had 24 points on 14 shots. All 8 of his makes were threes. He only attempted 1 2-point shot and he missed it. He was 8 of 13 on 3-pointers in this game. And he contributed a career high, I think tied a career high, 5 steals in this game from Donte DiVincenzo. He tied a team high plus 26 and plus minus, a game high, obviously, plus 26 on the night, and was really, really good. He helped keep this offense afloat in the first half when they were really struggling. Donte hit a couple of deep threes that really it really did keep the Wolves close. I mean, Minnesota trailed by as many as 12 points in the first half of this game, and it felt early like it could get away from them against Phoenix isn't bad, but a likely non-playoff Phoenix Suns team that is playing well below expectations. And DiVincenzo was a huge part of keeping this team afloat in the first half, and he was good down the stretch too for Minnesota. So credit to the two guys, the two former Knicks who both been out, who both came back and contributed in a really big way in this game. I want to hit some rotation stuff. I want to hit the third quarter. I want to talk defense. We'll talk about how Naz contributed despite the shooting issues, and we will talk about the foul that then it was. Perhaps it's probably not the first ever, but I think the first, at least that I've seen, the first time a player has not been called for a foul in live action, and then upon review, been given not just a foul, but a flagrant foul. That happened in this game. We'll talk about that in a little bit here as well. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, So even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. For instance, I love using FanDuel's live betting feature to keep every moment of the game exciting. Maybe you think it's going to be a late-game rally. We've seen some of those from the Wolves here recently. Maybe it's Ant's going to hit a clutch three and you want to get in on that action. You don't have to feel like you missed your chance. Plus, the app is super easy to use, so when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right. Let's talk about that third quarter. So third quarter, the action picks up. Minnesota's down by a bucket at halftime. And then third quarter is just like a flurry. Like Devin Booker comes out, hits a three immediately. Jaden McDaniels hits a three. Kevin Durant hits a three. And at this point, it's like, all right, they're going to have to guard somebody defensively, right? I mean, they only gave up 51 in the first half, but of course, everyone knows Devin Booker, Kevin Durant could go off at any point. I thought the Wolves were a little bit lackadaisical on the perimeter. And then after a couple more missed threes by either team, then Ant hits a three. Then Bull hits a three. So it's still just a 5-point game. Then Ant hits another three. And then a couple possessions later, he hits another one. Then he hits a tough bucket inside. And the Wolves finally take a lead. McDaniels hits a three mixed in there. Then Ant gets a couple trips to the line. He gets fouled on a three-pointer to make the Wolves lead a 4-point lead. And then the Suns commit a transition take foul against Ant. So he gets a free throw. And DiVincenzo hits a three. On the ensuing possession. And then on the inbound is when Jaden McDaniels steals I believe this was the play where this was the play. No, it wasn't. That was the fourth quarter when McDaniels got the steal. This was Alexander Walker gets a steal, leads to a McDaniels dunk. The Wolves get up by 10. The Suns push back a little bit in the fourth quarter, actually, after the play that I was just referencing that I confused for the third quarter steal, was when the Wolves got a bucket after the Julius Randle save. And then following that, McDaniel steals the inbounds, gets the dunk, and the Timberwolves, they withstood this push from Phoenix. Minnesota's lead got up to, what was it? 17. Yeah, this was the one I was thinking of. So Randle saves with about 8.5 minutes left of the game. Randle saves the ball from going out of bounds. They go up 15. The Suns turn it over on the inbound. McDaniel steals it, hits a layup. Suns call timeout. Wolves up 17. The Suns go on a really quick run to make this an 11-point game. They score 6 straight. Then Ant hits a three, and it's basically over from there. There was a bit of back and forth. But then once we got inside 5 minutes, the Suns scored like 7 points over the final 5 minutes. And then we had the drama of the Ant shooting thing. Let's just talk about that now. And then I want to hit a couple more like actual real basketball things. There's not a whole lot else to say. If you somehow miss the play, Anthony Edwards, after a Wolves steal, yet another Wolves steal, Donte DiVincenzo bounced the ball hard off the floor to try and get an alley-oop opportunity for Ant. And Ant was up there, and it was going to look nice. And Bradley Beal two-hand shoved him in the side, knocked him over. Ball goes out of bounds, and the call was out of bounds off Minnesota, which was absurd, of course, in the moment. I mean, ref standing, I don't even know which ref it was, standing right there looking at it and somehow misses a two-handed shove. Like, Ant's not just going to fall over. Like, I mean, he jumped. Like, he's not just falling over when he jumps straight up in the air because he didn't even have time to brace himself. It's a super dangerous play. I was actually a little surprised it wasn't a flagrant 2 because, I mean, that there was no reason to do that, to shove somebody with 2 hands when he's in the air. It's really a dirty play. And I know Bradley Beal doesn't necessarily have that reputation, but it's what it was. And I think it's a kind of a perfect microcosm. And guess what? Ant still shot 14 free throws, but a couple were because they were clear paths. One was he was fouled on a 3, which barely ever happens. And then there's this flagrant, like it was all basically in the second half. And so that's a little bit inflated because it's just how this game flow was. I mean, it just was. It wasn't getting the calls early in the game per usual. But it is really a microcosm of the season. Ant does get to the free throw line a decent amount because he's constantly fouled. He is. And it doesn't take away from the fact he's got to cool it. He's got to be careful with the technicals. We get it. We can all see it. The Wolves coaches see it. They're telling the league about it. It's the Shaq syndrome. I've said it before. I'll say it again. It's the Shaq syndrome. He's too big. He's too strong, and he doesn't flop. So guys bounce off of him, and it's, quote, marginal contact. It's the SGA thing from last year where he fouls him on the dunk. He's gripping his arm with his hand, and even on the last 2-minute report, they call it marginal contact. You could see SGA's hand wrapped around the forearm of Anthony Edwards when he's dunking. That's not marginal contact. It doesn't matter if it doesn't affect the shot, right? If he's too strong and somebody's hanging on his back, even if it doesn't prohibit him from scoring, it doesn't mean it's not a foul. It's the same thing that happened with Shaq. The difference, of course, is Anthony Edwards is an 84, 85% free throw shooter. So if teams foul Ant and they call it all, it's gonna hurt their defense. And so the of course we know the philosophy, we saw this in the playoffs. It came out last year. I think it might have even been Beal that said to foul Ant. Was it Beal that said that in the first round? That like the quiet part out loud. It's literally to foul him, play him physically, because they're not going to call it more often than not, and it's going to make it really difficult for Ant. He's going to get frustrated. So the ancillary benefit is if he gets frustrated and gets attacked or gets ejected, right? But what you're trying to do is they're not going to call them all, right? It's a pretty classic youth basketball strategy, actually. Play super physical. They're not going to call everything, right? That's exactly how teams defend Anthony Edwards. And it's time that the league figures that out, that's clearly what the directive is here. It's completely different than the SGA thing. It's completely different than some of these other guys, the free throw merchants of the league. Yes, Ant complains. Yes, the hay is obnoxious. Yes, he needs to cool it. It doesn't change the fact that teams defend Ant differently than everyone else because they know he doesn't get a fair whistle. It is painfully obvious that that's what's going on here. Again, Beal, I think it was, said the quiet part out loud last year in the playoffs. It is a real thing, and it's got to get figured out because it's hurting it hurts the opportunity for Ant to have some of these big games. I know he's scoring at the free throw line when he does get to the line 14 times, but I think fans would rather see that dunk than a flagrant foul not get called laughably and then get assessed because the Wolves challenged the out of bounds call. I don't know. It's just insane. The way that this thing has kind of devolved, how Ant is officiated, and Ant I think hurts his own case because of the way that he handles it. And refs are going to be, I know refs like him as a person. I know everybody likes Ant as a person. He's a nice guy. He's a happy guy. But it doesn't help his case when he acts the way he does because officials are less likely to give him a call, fair or unfair. That's just how it works. All right. I'm off the soapbox now. I thought I'd put that right in the middle of the show today. I don't want it to all be about officiating. I don't like this show to be about officiating. And if you're new to the show, it barely ever is. I'm probably up to 5 to 7 times now this year I brought up officiating on the show, but that's probably a top 3 like soapbox rant moment for me on officiating because I don't like it's not fun if we only talk about officiating, but at some point this has just got to be fixed. All right. Other stuff that happened in this game. We talked about DiVincenzo. The defense in this game was actually really good for Minnesota outside of the first quarter. After that, and like the first couple minutes of the third quarter that I talked about when Durant and Beal and Bol were just knocking down threes. The Wolves forced 20 turnovers on Phoenix, and it only led to 12 fast break points. Yeah, Minnesota had 12 fast break points. But the fact that they forced 20 turnovers was huge. And they were like legit. Like it wasn't just Phoenix being sloppy. A lot of it was live ball stuff. Minnesota had 18 steals in this game. So yeah, so almost all of them were live ball turnovers. DiVincenzo had 5, Alexander Walker had 3, Jaden had 3, Naz, Mike Conley, and Anthony Edwards all had 2 steals apiece. The activity level defensively was really, really great. And it came out after the game that Chris Finch had held another one of those team meetings today that said, he was basically like, hey, rotations are going to change. Guys are coming back. Let's play for each other. And we saw that. The guys celebrating off the bench after that fourth quarter sequence with the McDaniels steal after the Randle hustle play. And it's great to see this team get back to swarming on defense, forcing 20 turnovers, getting 18 steals. And by the way, the Wolves only turned it over 8 times themselves. In fact, only one player had more than 1 turnover. Randle had 2. Nobody else had more than a single turnover in this game. It was just a really strong, clean performance when it was all said and done. And so much of it was in the third and fourth quarter. But anyway, I thought that was great. I thought that some of the Chris Finch adjustments were great. With the addition of Randle, he started using Jade McDaniels, and without Rudy on the floor, like that is, this is easier to do because you don't have Rudy Gobert who's setting the screen 90% of the time or whatever. But Jade McDaniels was screening a lot in the half court, especially in the third quarter. And with Naz Reid and Donte DiVincenzo on the floor spacing, you can't focus entirely on the roller. You can't focus entirely on Naz or Donte because the other one's out on the floor. It's just a potent offensive lineup and a good adjustment from Chris Finch. That was super impressive. All right. Let's see. What do I want to close with? Oh, we'll do studs and duds. I've got one issue that came up, a couple of things that we'll struggle with, and this is mostly not having Rudy, who's supposed to be back soon. And then we'll talk studs and duds. We'll talk about how Naz still contributed despite another terrible shooting night. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. They swoosh, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. It's simple. When any player scores 50 or more in a game during the 24-25 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. There's a few ways you can take advantage of the deal. For instance, maybe it's a Friday night. So on Saturday, you want to have a game day feast. Somebody, say it's Ant, gets a 50-point performance on Friday night. You want to get some wings, get some pizza, burgers, whatever, delivered straight to your door. You could do that on Saturday. Or maybe it's late night cravings that you want to enjoy later on that Saturday night. You're going to stay up late and watch highlights. You just need a midnight snack. Use Dash Pass to grab something delicious while saving big. You can sign up for Dash Pass to be ready to save. When any player scores 50 or more in a game, and almost did it. He had 44 on Sunday. Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day, up to $10 off. Just use the promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight the day after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. You must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. Okay, so the Wolves overall played well outside of the first quarter and maybe the very first part of the third quarter. Issues. Points in the paint. Minnesota only had 26 points in the paint themselves. They shot the ball well enough from three. They attempted 52 threes and hit 40%, and they got to the line 21 times. So they were okay, but they gave up 34 points in the paint. Now, Phoenix, weirdly enough, against Phoenix, like think back last year to the playoffs, the Wolves having Rudy and Cat in the starting lineup. The Wolves had a huge size advantage. Phoenix had Nurkic, who barely played, and like it just, Durant played a lot of center. They were playing small ball against Minnesota. Well, now you've got Nick Richards, Bol, and Durant at the three in the starting lineup for Phoenix, and Minnesota didn't have Gobert and obviously doesn't have Cat. So you have an undersized center in Naz Reid and frankly, a little bit of an undersized four in Julius Randle playing for Minnesota. I guess you have McDaniels at the three, but still a small lineup for the Wolves dealing with the Suns, and Phoenix ends up outscoring Minnesota in the paint 34-26. And rebounding wise, Minnesota got out-rebounded by 22 in this game. A lot of that was early. I talked about how early in the game, Minnesota's defensive rebounding was miserable. For the game, the Suns had 10 offensive rebounds. I bet more than half of those were in the first quarter. Phoenix out-rebounded Minnesota 57-35. Naz had 10 rebounds. McDaniels had 7. Randle had 6. Ant had 5. Nobody else on the team had more than 2 rebounds in this game. They need more out of the backcourt. They need more out of DiVincenzo, Alexander Walker, even Jalen Clark, Conley. Like, they just need more rebounds out of those guys. And it's an area that they've improved in for the most part of late. It just wasn't good in this game. It's not like an alarm bell situation at this point, but it's something to pay attention to. Rotation-wise, notable that Chris Finch kind of sort of had a 7-man rotation in this game. Jalen Clark played in both halves. He scored only 11 points. So it was like barely an 8-man rotation. Technically, it was 9. TJ Shannon played 5 minutes, I believe, all in the first half. Oh, sorry. Yeah, 5 minutes all in the first half, and then he played 2 minutes at garbage time. Actually, no, I don't think he was part of the garbage time lineup. All that to say, I think he basically only played in the first half. Very limited rotation minutes for Shannon, limited rotation minutes for Clark. They combined to play 18 minutes. DiVincenzo and Alexander Walker played 27 and 26 minutes respectively, and Rob Dillingham's not in the rotation at all. With the return of Randle, no Luka Garza in the rotation. So something to keep an eye on. Chris Finch talked about how he wanted to get, I think he said he wanted to get to possibly a 10-man rotation. In this game, it was like a 7 and 2 halves rotation. Now Rudy's going to come back, and that, we'll see what that does to it. It's going to depend a little bit on the matchup, right? Like Garza didn't have to play in this game because they could play smaller against this Phoenix team, despite Phoenix starting 3 essentially 7-footers. The way Phoenix plays, the Wolves got away with playing smaller, and it was more the frenetic pace that they kind of implemented defensively, forcing the 20 turnovers, getting 18 steals. So it worked out. But I'm curious to see what this looks like when Rudy comes back, and what those minutes look like for Jalen Clark, TJ Shannon, and maybe even Rob Dillingham. Although the implication here would be Dillingham's the 11th guy in a 10-man rotation, and there's some nights that Clark and or Shannon don't even play. So that's something to keep an eye on, because both those guys have had obviously really strong moments. They both gotten starts over the last few weeks. So that's going to be a tricky situation for Chris Finch to try and manage, I think, but a good problem to have, to seemingly have like too many rotation guys when it wasn't clear that they had enough early in the year. And that's not an indictment on how Finch has handled things. It's just I think actually a positive thing. The fact that now they think they know what they have in terms of these young guys and if they can be trusted in certain situations. All right. Let's hit studs and duds. Obviously, Ant, we talked about 44 on 22 shots. Take that any day of the week. 7 assists to only 1 turnover, plus 5 rebounds, 2 steals. He was 6 of 14 on threes and made all 14 of his free throws. I feel like shooting free throws better. I bet if we pulled like by month or whatever, I bet he's shooting free throws better over the last couple months than he did the first couple months of the season. So he gets a stud, of course. I thought it was a really smart performance from Anthony Edwards. I thought he pushed all the right buttons. You'll take the mix of 14 threes and 8 twos, especially if he gets to the line 14 times. So a good game from Ant. I thought Julius Randle was great. 20 points on 8 of 14, 6 boards for Randle, 2 of 5 on threes, hit a couple, I think both in the first half. Yeah, both in the first half, which was big, again, when this team wasn't scoring enough early in the game. He was good there. Donte DiVincenzo was my third stud, 24 points on 8 of 14. Again, 8 of 13 on threes, only attempted 1 2-point shot, and he made 8 threes, 5 steals for Donte DiVincenzo, and tied with Naz for a game high, plus 26, plus minus. A really, really strong performance, and having him back is huge. And if he just kind of hit the not a full reset button, because he wasn't good in like November, but I guess reset to right before the injury. If he could pick up where he left off, maybe we could say that, / reset to where he was in the preseason when he couldn't miss. That New York Knicks version of Donte, which is really what he was when he was starting in January before he got hurt, that would be massive for this team. And we'll see after he puts up 24 and 5 steals off the bench, and Mike Conley scores 3 points in 20 minutes and commits 5 fouls, was a -5. Like, we'll see if that means maybe that's the kind of the impetus for putting DiVincenzo back in the starting lineup and putting Conley back on the bench, because that's what it was before the injury to DiVincenzo in that Warriors game in January. So we'll see if Finch goes back to that for Tuesday night's game. All right, duds. Mike Conley has got to be a dud in this game. He still serves his purpose on this team. He's still a rotation guy. He's got to be. He's played well in spurts. He shot the ball great recently, so let's not forget that. Like, he's shooting lights out basically since late January. This was not a good game for Conley. I mean, I just said this, but 5 fouls in 20 minutes, a -5 in 20 minutes. He was the only Timberwolves player that did not play garbage time that was a negative plus-minus in this game. Randle was even. Jalen Clark was a +4. Everybody else was +11 or better. And Conley was a -5 in this game. Now, a lot of that's because this is part of the reason why it's so noisy. That stat is so noisy because DiVincenzo was on the floor when Conley wasn't. But, that matters too. No other duds in this game. I thought everyone played well. Jaden would have been close to getting a stud. I thought he was great defensively. He put up 13 and 7, had 4 assists and 3 steals, knocked down a couple threes. It was a really good Jaden game too. Naz, I said we'd talk about him. He was a team high, tied with DiVincenzo for a team high +26. He shot just 3 of 15. He was 1 of 8 on threes. We might talk about this a little bit more tomorrow. But over his last 6 games, Naz is shooting just 34% from the field and 27.5% from 3. He's still putting up 17 and 10 because the volume has been there, and more than a steal and 1.5 blocks a game. He's still been a valuable player. Now, if you take the full and that's post last 6 games is post All-Star break. Go back to February 1st, which was the first game he started after the Randle injury. And overall now as a starter, Naz is averaging just shy of 19 points and 10 rebounds a game. 41% from the floor and 32% on threes, just under 3 free throw attempts per game, a block and a half per game. So, fits and starts with Naz as a starter. it doesn't change anything about how we should think of Nas, but I just wanted to put that out there that that's kind of what we've seen so far with him as a starter over the last month. All right. That's all I got for you today. We'll be back tomorrow. I do want to talk some lineup stuff related to Randle and Ant because what we saw Sunday, we can't look past how important Randle is to the Wolves offense. So we'll talk about that. The Wolves don't play tonight. They play Tuesday against the Sixers in the first night of a back-to-back. Of course, not at home because why would it be? The Wolves get another one-game homestand just like they had against OKC, just over a week ago. Here we are for another one. So they play Tuesday night against Phoenix, then they go to Charlotte, which is a very scary game. That after the one-game road trip, traveling into a back-to-back against a bad team that's beaten some good teams recently. I think they just beat LA, the Lakers. Scary. Anyway, they play Philadelphia Tuesday night. So we'll preview that game on Tuesday's show. We'll talk some lineup stuff. And then Wednesday will, of course, be the post-game pod following Wolves Sixers on Tuesday night. All right. That's all I got for you today. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day of the week. Of course, Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Of course, you can also follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T, and also Beecken on Twitter. That's Beecken, 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. You can also subscribe to the daily newsletter at LockedOnDaily.com. It's one stop for Ultimate Wolves and NBA coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free right now at LockedOnDaily.com. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.